Hello and welcome back to the Roundup by News of the Week, the show where I, Jake Whitwell, summarise and explain the news, helping you to stay informed. This week's show has had me writing the script right up until 10 minutes ago. Therefore, the show's main focus for the week has changed from discussing things like UK abortion law to the UK spending review to a more international focus with things like protests in America, the Israeli strikes on Iran, becoming much more of a forefront of the news, and with domestic politics news like Labour's U-turn on the national grooming gang scandal and the need for an inquiry on that taking precedent over the other news. Don't worry though, I haven't omitted anything from this episode. It's all still there as it was, and so you're still in the best place to stay informed. Moving on swiftly then to news on politics, The Guardian noted the Sizewell C nuclear power station will be built as part of the government's £14 billion nuclear power plan. The announcement of the power station has been long awaited, and the government said it will create 10,000 jobs with the capacity to supply electricity to the equivalent of 6 million homes. The Energy Secretary Ed Miliband said that the programme will get Britain off the fossil fuel roller coaster and that nuclear power is essential to Britain's clean energy and net zero ambitions. Sizewell C was identified as a potential plant in 2009, but it's not been fully funded since then. Some partial funding and some discussions over its development was undertaken by the previous Conservative government, but nothing as expansive as what we've got this week. Miliband said the UK has been too slow in developing nuclear energy. The Times reported that major changes to abortion laws could stop prosecution for women who get abortions after 24 weeks. Labour MP Stella Creasy has tabled an amendment to the crime and policing bill to be voted on next week. So has Tonia Antonozzi, Creasy's bill will make abortion a human right and appeal swathes of legislation, while Antonozzi's bill will make a woman acting in relation to her own pregnancy legal. Antonozzi's bill has been backed by 130 Labour MPs. It is the less controversial of two and has apparently gained support from cabinet members as well. Creasy's bill is backed by 95 MPs. Currently, if a woman gets an abortion after 24 weeks, she is liable for prosecution, and so is anyone who helps her, unless there is a case of like a medical emergency for the woman or the severe severe disability in the baby. Both of these bills will change that in different ways, of course, like we just talked about. Now, as I understand it, the bills will be free votes, which means the MPs will be able to vote on their own terms, independent of what their party lines are. As free votes, it isn't clear how the majority might look and how and which way the vote will pass, although the reason we currently sit at 24 weeks is because that is when a baby is considered viable outside of the woman's fetus, and so it's reasonable to assume there will be backlash on the point of expanding past that. Politics Home detailed new Labour politicians have demanded better paternity pay for their parliamentary staff. 21 Labour MPs wrote to the Leader of the Commons and the Parliamentary Standards Authority calling for changes. In collaboration with campaigners from Dad's Shift, the MPs described current paternity provisions as lacklustre and unfair. The current laws mean that they aren't able to support their staff for more than 2 weeks, with some saying they can't support their staff appropriately at the most important time of their lives. Essentially, the group are asked for their staff's contracts to be amended so they can go a bit above and beyond that 2-week minimum. LBC noted Angela Rayner has howled the end of 2 centuries of injustice as the Vagrancy Act, which outlawed and criminalised homelessness, has been repealed. The 1864 Vagrancy Act included punishments for idle and disorderly persons and rogues and vagabonds in England. The law has been labelled as archaic and cruel by Rayner and the Homelessness Minister Rushanara Ali, who said it was not fit for purpose. The government said scrapping the bill will lay the foundation for its mission to tackle homelessness in the UK, and that new measures will be implemented to facilitate this. These new measures will come reportedly in the crime and policing bill through an amendment. Campaigners like the Chief of Crisis said the measures represent a landmark which will change the lives and prevent people from being pushed away into the streets. Channel 4 covered spending review, and with Labour boosting housing and the NHS's department's budgets. Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced spending review this week on Wednesday, where she outlined department budgets increases specifically over departments like the NHS and housing, as well as defence. She announced big changes in defence spending, planning reform, and so housing and transport, as well as the investment in Great British Energy, on top of the 3% department spending in the NHS. Meanwhile, some departments faced cuts, like the Foreign Office, the Home Office, and the Environment Office. Some of these cuts have led to fears over the lack of policing being available, although it is expected that over the spending review, departmental budgets will rise in total. I'm in the process of writing an article on the situation, and it should come out tomorrow or Tuesday. In the event that it does, go check it out on newsoftheweek.net for more information on the spending review. And finally, on news on politics, the Times detailed, and finally in news on political change, the Times detailed that Keir Starmer has announced an inquiry into the national grooming gangs. After months of resisting calls for an inquiry on the grounds that it was a matter for local councils and local courts, the PM announced that the national inquiry is to be held into the gangs, becoming convinced that it was the right thing to do after reading a review by Baroness Casey of Blackstock. In her report commissioned by the Home Secretary in January, one of the findings and recommendations is expected to be a national inquiry. It's also expected to contain details that link the grooming gangs to Pakistani men, some men of Pakistani origin, and find that the white British girls targeted were then institutionally ignored due to fears of racism allegations. While at a G7 summit in Canada, the PM spoke on the issue and defended his U-turn, saying that the government were never against a national inquiry, but needed to look again to make themselves assured on the question. This is after he said he wanted to double check his previous argument that a national inquiry would slow down justice. The issue was brought into prominence by the campaigns from the Tory Party, Reform UK, and comments on social media from Elon Musk, who weighed in on the subject on X and emphasised the injustice of the lack of an inquiry and called for the government to act. Anyway, that concludes the news I got on policy change. I'll move on to foreign policy now. In news on foreign policy, the BBC reported the UK has been advised to scrap the Chagos Islands deal and agree a new one by UN experts. Experts at a UN panel said the agreement appears to be at variance with the Chagosians' right to return, which basically means it might violate the rights of the Chagosians. The panel was part of the UN's Human Rights Council, and it is independent of the council itself. The experts are not UN staff. The right of return was not the only issue for the experts, who were also worried that the deal might fail to protect the unique heritage of the Chagosian people. 4 News noted that Britain and Gibraltar have agreed a new deal on trade and travel. The deal will remove restrictions on cross-border trade and travel, which is considered a result after negotiations since Brexit. The agreement removes all barriers on trade and travel and basically ensures the free movement of goods and people between Spain and Gibraltar. It's been labelled as a historic milestone by the EU's Trade Commissioner. The Telegraph covered fears that British foreign aid is being used to teach Gazan children to wage a jihad. An Israeli-funded non-profit organisation has revealed that materials are being used to teach pupils anti-Semitic tropes and violent imagery. One volume of such extremist textbooks reportedly says the liberation of Palestine is a personal obligation for all Muslims, with presenting martyrdom and suicide bombing in a positive light, and as well as depicting the process in graphic detail. The government has insisted no foreign aid was used directly to fund the textbooks in Gaza, and went further to condemn the use of materials that incite violence. However, the government sent £101 million to Gaza in April, with part of that money being spent on education. They also restored the funding for the UNRWA, a group which, among other humanitarian causes, invests in education in Gaza. That concluded the news I got on foreign policy. In news on other areas of politics, the Telegraph reported on riots erupting in Northern Ireland after a sexual assault. Violence broke out in the town of Ballymena, I think, this week after two Romanian-speaking teenagers were arrested and charged with attempted rape after a teenage girl was sexually assaulted last weekend. The teenage boys confirmed their details through a Romanian translator. According to politicians in the region, this led to peaceful protests, which subsequently resulted in violent protests, where houses were burnt, where property was damaged, ranging from boats being flipped over to cars being smashed up. The streets in the surrounding area have been closed, with people being urged to avoid the area until further notice. BBC News detailed that Foreign Office staff have been told to consider resigning if they disagree with the government's stance on Gaza. More than 300 civil servants in the Foreign Office have raised concerns about the UK's arms sales to Israel, which were continuing at the time of their letter. They considered it potentially complicit, that they considered the continued arms sales meant that they considered the UK potentially complicit in Israel's disregard for international law. The Foreign Office stated it has mechanisms and systems in place to deal with these sort of concerns, while one signatory, who was not named by the BBC, said there was disappointment at the fact that those channels are being shut down and frustration that that dialogue is not being facilitated. In any case, the two most senior civil servants in the office, Nick Dyer and Sir Nick Roberts, replied to the letter and essentially said that it was an honourable course of action to resign if the civil servants' disagreements with the government are profound enough. The letter was dated to the 16th of May and was supposedly representative of civil servants working for the Foreign Office around the world. Worse still, for the reflection on its leadership, it is not the first letter sent in recent years. The Guardian reported that Kemi Badenoch has said she does not speak to women in burqas at her constituency surgery. The Telegraph leader responded to a question over burqa bans in general in an interview with the Telegraph. I think the Guardian sort of picked out a weird part of Badenoch's response. The wider response that there was a heap of stuff that was more insidious than burqas in this country in terms of damaging cultural integration. At the same time, she suggested that a burqa ban could be ineffective, with using France as an example of a place with a burqa ban that has worse cultural integration than the UK. She also mentioned the police capacity to deal with the issue of actually enforcing a burqa ban, suggesting that she thinks the possibility of a ban might be impractical anyway. But yeah, Badenoch did say that she does not personally talk to women wearing burqas or other people wearing masks like face coverings or balaclavas. She did say that it should be the right of small business owners and business owners in general to determine their own policy on burqa bans and things like that. LBC reported that Reform UK's membership has dropped by 3,000 in the past week amid the burqa ban row. The party's membership dropped by 2,924 members last week after a newly elected MP, Sarah Ponchin, asked over a burqa ban. The party spokesperson said the losses represent a normal fluctuation in membership, pointing to its success last year, where 200,000 people joined the party membership. The Independent noted that a Labour peer, Harman, has said that ministers are on resignation watch over benefits cuts. Harman said she is bracing for resignations from ministers outside of the top level over Labour's welfare reforms. And that concluded the news I got on other politics. Moving on to global news, then, this is the section where I've had to do the most rejigging. I've broken it down into sections of relevant news, with LA coming into perspective from the early part of the week where protests featured over immigration. I've also got news on Gaza, Ukraine and Iran, as well as general news in this section, just to make it abundantly clear what we're talking about at a given time. I will say this as we go through, and I'll probably put it up in a little headline on either side of me as well. Okay, to start off with then, on news on LA, the Wall Street Journal noted Marines were deployed to LA over protests over ICE, 700 Marines were deployed to LA to protect federal buildings and personnel amid protests over deportations and Trump's federal immigration policy. This is after Trump sent in the National Guard, the first time this happened since the 1960s. For what it's worth, sending the Marines is the first time this happened in 3 decades as well. This comes amid Trump's disagreement with California Governor Gavin Newsom, who has been objecting to Trump's policy on the grounds of it being an incursion on state sovereignty. On the protests, though, Karen Bass, the mayor, said that the protests were mainly peaceful, with vandalism and violence fringe elements of it. That is despite there being images of looting and violence available online to some extent. The Times noted that Trump has called for the arrest of Gavin Newsom, who he called grossly incompetent. Trump called for Newsom's arrest and claimed a civil war would happen if people like him were left to govern. This in news on Gaza then, Reuters reported that the UN has said most flour delivered to Gaza was looted or taken by starving people or gangs. The UN has said that it's only been able to bring minimal amounts of flour into Gaza, and it has so far delivered 4,600 metric tons of flour, with aid groups estimating that between 8,000 and 10,000 tons of aid would give each family a bag of flour. It has been noted that most of the aid already supplied has been taken by gangs and desperate, starving people before it even got to aid centres, placing greater emphasis on the concerns over aid already going on in Gaza. Reuters noted that UN experts have said that Israel is committing extermination in Gaza by killing in schools. The targeting of civilians sheltering in schools and religious places violates the crime against humanity of extermination and comes as part of a concerted campaign to obliterate Palestinian life, is how the UN experts characterized Israeli actions in a new report. It's understood there are fears over the educational, cultural, and religious attacks on Palestinians. This comes after Israel disengaged from the UN Human Rights Council back in February. Reuters detailed comments from Netanyahu, who said that significant progress had been made to talks to release hostages. Netanyahu said earlier this week that there had been significant progress made in efforts to ensure the release of hostages between Hamas and the IDF, but it's too soon to raise hope that a deal would be reached imminently. On Iran, Sky News detailed that Israel has attacked Iran and launched more than 100 strikes on nuclear sites and targeted scientists. Israel launched strikes on Iran with roofs being blown out, burnt and shattered in residential areas. It also destroyed the country's largest nuclear enrichment site and took out top military commanders in the process. Iran fired 100 missiles back, with most being intercepted or falling short. Some did get through Israel's defences though and hit, with 2 being seriously injured and 34 people being slightly injured in initial strikes. The US also reportedly got involved to defend Israel intercepting missiles, although they continued to deny that they were involved in Israel's initial strike. The Guardian reported that 10 were killed in Iranian strikes as Trump has threatened Tehran with the full strength of its military if it attacks the US. In general news, the Times covered a school shooting in Austria where 11 people died, including the suspect, with a further 12 being injured. The shooting was in Graz, the country's second largest city, with the gunman found dead in a cubicle on the campus of a secondary school. Students resulted to playing dead, with one officer hearing screams and responding relatively quickly. The school has been closed indefinitely, with the sports hall being turned into a centre for mourning and counselling. Reuters detailed that India has ordered an inspection of Boeing 787s after the Air India crash. India's aviation regulator has ordered the inspection of planes after the deadly crash this week. Planes have not yet been grounded, but that reportedly is an option for the government and the regulator. 270 bodies were recovered from the crash site, with 241 of these deaths being crew and passengers. This investigation will form part of a report which is expected to be published in 3 months. This comes as bodies are slowly being released from the morgue after quite complicated and difficult identification processes delaying full-scale releases. Sky News noted a manhunt is underway after a US politician was shot dead along with her husband. Melissa Hortman and her husband were shot and killed, while another senator, John Hoffman, and his wife were injured but are expected to survive. The suspect was reportedly impersonating a police officer, and manhunt is underway. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said that it was a politically motivated assassination, and that is concurrent with police findings, who reportedly found a list of other targets. As such, the planned protests in the area protesting Donald Trump's military parade have been cancelled through fear of safety concerns. The Guardian detailed millions across the US have turned out for No King's Day parades against Donald Trump. At 2,100 protests in all 50 states, millions of Americans turned out to cities and small towns to protest Donald Trump's presidency on his birthday and the day of an American military parade. The organisers were committed to peaceful protests, and given the scale of the protest, they mostly maintained this. Although in LA and Portland, protesters were deemed unlawful by enforcement and met with tear gas. In Ukraine, The Guardian reported on Ukrainian prisoner exchanges, with Russia and Ukraine being set to exchange 1,000 severely wounded soldiers from each side. This is after 1,212 fallen soldiers. 1,212 soldiers were reportedly returned to Ukraine in exchange for an unknown number of Russian soldiers. The Eye detailed that experts have confirmed that Russia's losses of 1 million are credible. 250,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the war in Ukraine, with the other 750,000 being made up of injured or wounded soldiers. Zelensky said that the number represents the price Putin is willing to pay for his sick geopolitical fantasies. And that concluded the news I got on global affairs. In news on stats and trends, the City AM reported that Reform and Conservative supporters are open to an alliance, according to their own poll. The poll was conducted of 1,250 people between the 6th and 8th of June, where 48% of Conservative supporters and 51% of Reform UK voters supported a merger. Conversely, 44% of Conservative voters and 36% of Reform voters opposed the merger, with others being neutral or insecure on their answers. According to a City AM, an electoral pact is also a popular strategy between the two parties. The Eye noted that Farage is more trusted on the economy than Starmer. Merlin Strategies, the company behind the poll, revealed that Farage is more trusted on the economy than Starmer, with the report also examining how radical economic policy was and how people felt about economic policy. 33% saw Farage as the most responsible. He was also the most radical. And the Prime Minister was on 31% of people seeing him as the most responsible. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch was only trusted by 21% of respondents, and Ed Davey lower down further, with only 14% of respondents trusting him with the economy. Times reported that there has been more conflict in 2024 than any other year since World War II. Researchers have found that there were 61 instances of state-based violence last year, and 11 full-blown wars, with when that is classified as conflict, with 1,000 related battle deaths across the world. The researchers also found that civilians have been at higher risk of last year, with the civilians were at higher risk last year as they were deliberately targeted. And a total of 160,000 people died as a result of organised violence last year, which was the highest since 1989. The Guardian detailed that the UK economy shrank by 0.3%. Figures from the ONS showed the economy shrank by 0.3% in May. Stamp duty changes, tariffs, and employers' national insurance contributions were all contributions to the decline. Anyway, that concludes the news I got on stats and trends. I'll move on to non-political news now. In non-political news, the Telegraph detailed a sunken ship worth £16 billion of treasure has been found in the Caribbean. The Spanish galleon ship San Jose was sunk by the Royal Navy in 1708. It was carrying gold, silver, emeralds, which was going to fund the Spanish War of Succession. The Times reported that David Walliams gave a Nazi salute during a BBC recording. And BBC One recording for the Christmas special of Would I Lie to You? David Walliams made 2 Nazi salutes while another panel member was describing a scenario. There was unease in the audience, with one person calling it awkward and describing gasps from panel members who were shocked, as it was before the watershed in British TV, and so many restrictions were in place on what could be screened. The host, Rob Brydon, reprimanded Williams while his team leader, Lee Mack, looked at him unimpressedly. Anyway, that concludes all the news I got this week. Thank you very much for listening and watching. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe and comment, as it helps me do this every single week. If you thought I did anything especially well in this video, or maybe I got things wrong, let me know in the comments below and I will address it as soon as possible. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good week. Bye.